This program is rated 14 plus and contains scenes of violence and mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, in a special episode.
She digs her fingers into the icy dirt as she tries to wiggle free. Carissa's eyes bulging as she shouts at her attacker.
The man leads him downstairs, the gun pressed firmly to the back of his head.
Then he saw something that dropped him down into his father's chair. Keith kept repeating that his mother was a murderer.
I thought of him doing me harm, and that was the only thought I had in my head.
Truman Capote may be credited with kickstarting the modern true crime genre, but in the last decade, its popularity has exploded. So what makes an author decide to tackle such dark subject matter? And how do they avoid putting entertainment before empathy?
Sometimes horrible crimes, we just want to forget them, and I respect that, but I wanted people to know more about this girl.
The title of the book is A Daughter's Deadly Deception, the Jennifer Pan story. Her whole life revolved around lies and deception.
I've never really thought of this as a true crime book or a true crime investigation. Maybe it's more like a false crime.
True crime is a wonderful vehicle for giving people a sense of not just sort of what dates things happened, but also what was it like to actually be there.
Tonight, 4 authors and the 4 high-profile cases they tackled. Here now is Murder They Wrote.
This case was something I had never seen before. And right from the get-go, it caught people's attention. And then it grew from that into, I think, personally, one of the craziest true crime stories of all time.
Police say 3 armed men, one masked, burst into the home around 10 o'clock last night. The daughter was taken upstairs and tied up while the intruders began making demands for cash.
My name is Jeremy Grimaldi. I'm a former crime reporter, court reporter, and author. And I wrote a book about Jennifer Pan. The man leads him downstairs, the gun pressed firmly to the back of his head. The scale of the threat to Han and his family is revealed one horrifying step at a time. I wanted to start the book from the father's perspective. I'm a father, and I know it's every parent's nightmare to have men break into their home. Downstairs, another masked man, also wearing a flat-brimmed baseball cap, stands over Han's wife, Bik Ha, a gun to her neck. On November 8th, 2010, 3 masked intruders broke into Jennifer Pan's Markham home. It was a normal evening in the Jennifer Pan household. Jennifer was in her bedroom. Her mother had come home from line dancing. She was soaking her feet while watching television. The father, Han Pan, was sleeping in his bed. Han's wife, she senses the imminent danger. She blurts out a panicked plea. "You can hurt us, but please don't hurt my daughter." Blankets were thrown over both of their heads. The father allowed the blanket to remain. The mother fought the blanket off. They were both shot in the back of the head. The father miraculously survived.
24-year-old Jennifer Pan, who was in the house at the time of the invasion.
The couple's 24-year-old daughter, Jennifer, was also home at the time.
Jennifer Pan was tied up upstairs to the banister with a string. After the gunman fled the home, Jennifer Pan is heard dialing 911, crying, screaming, hysterical. "Dad?" His daughter Jennifer yells down to him, "I'm calling 911, I'm okay." And the police arrive soon after.
This is just such a tragic situation. And
The chief of police who came to the murder scene himself this morning says it appears the motive is robbery.
The stage between the incident and Han Pan waking up and speaking to the police is is what Hollywood dramas are made of.
Do you, Jennifer Pan, swear that the evidence you shall give on this...
It's a time where Jennifer Pan is treated as a victim.
I do.
So today's the 9th of November, 2010.
And you can see this in the interrogation video.
You have nothing to apologize to me about. I'm here to help you, okay?
I heard my parents going down the stairs, and my mom was asking them for me to come with them. They wouldn't let me come with them. And then I heard 2 pops. My mom screamed. I yelled out for her. And a couple more pops.
One of the inconsistencies the police picked up on was how Jennifer managed to call the police.
Are you restrained from movement? How far can you move your hands from the banister?
They tied my upper arm.
Yes?
Around the banister.
Yes. So now how can you get to the phone? And how do you make the phone call? 911? And do you talk down like that?
Yes, I'm yelling at the phone like this.
And how can you hear?
It raised a lot of questions.
I turned the volume on max.
For the last 2 weeks, the father has been in hospital, unable to speak. That is until early last week when police were finally able to interview him. An interview that resulted in very incriminating information.
He tells officers how he went down the stairs at gunpoint and saw his daughter, Jennifer Pan, whispering and speaking intimately with one of the intruders, not tied up.
Welcome back. When intruders burst into a family home in Markham, Ontario, the father barely made it out alive after witnessing the murder of his wife. Also in the home, his daughter Jennifer, who claimed to be tied up upstairs. On this special episode of Crime Beat, we meet the true crime writers telling the stories of some of Canada's most tragic crimes. We now return to Murder They Wrote.
In a shocking announcement today, police confirmed they have made 1 arrest in this brutal home invasion.
The victim's daughter, 24-year-old Jennifer Pan, has subsequently been charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder in the shooting death of her mother and in the shooting of her father.
Police are still looking for 3 male suspects considered armed and dangerous.
Video exclusive to Global News shows a young man in police custody.
There was 3 guys in the home and a driver. There's Lenford Crawford. There's David Milvaganam. There's Jennifer's ex-boyfriend, Daniel Wong. And there is who many consider to be the linchpin, Eric Carty. The gunman was never caught.
Jennifer Pan told police when they interrogated her she had nothing to do with it.
So this wasn't some evil plot that you thought up to...
Oh my God, no.
On the witness stand at her murder trial, she admitted she had 2 plans. One was to have herself killed, the other was to have her father murdered. Pan says when she canceled the hits, she thought it was clear both plans were off, and no one was to die.
So I stayed for the entire 10-month court case. My impression of Jennifer was sort of like morbid fascination.
The Crown alleges that she'd been caught lying to her parents about whether she was working, whether she was in university, and crucially, whether she'd broken up with her boyfriend, Danny Wong.
Her father told the jury he had given his daughter an ultimatum before the shooting. Stop seeing Danny Wong or wait until I'm dead.
Pan's lawyer asked why not just move out. She answered, I didn't want to abandon my family. I didn't want them to abandon me. I would be shamed if I moved out, and I wasn't married.
When you read a newspaper about a court case, you can hear about what happened that day. But there was so much context in this story.
As soon as the verdict was announced, I saw Jennifer Pan very dramatically look to the ground and...
When the verdict came down that she had been sentenced to first-degree murder sentence, the intensity, the drama was real.
And then after that, she did start to cry and she was wiping away tears with a tissue.
I did end up speaking to a number of her colleagues, teachers, music instructors, because I tried to tell the story of her upbringing, because the transformation of Jennifer from a straight-A student, musical prodigy perhaps, or a figure skating prodigy is a wild one. It's easy to blame other people. Some may speculate when she met her boyfriend, but a lot of people don't think that that's the actual problem. But at some point, she loses confidence perhaps in her abilities and stops focusing on school and starts focusing on her private life. But she was sort of living under her father's thumb. When it comes to the true crime genre, there is a lot of criticism around it for glorification or for making it sort of sexy. And so when I wrote it, I really did my best to try and take a 360 view. When I wrote the book, I always planned on going to the home, Helen Avenue. Knowing how much violence had been brought to bear on this unsuspecting family gave the home an eerie feel. My stomach churned, much like Jennifer's might have done in the police station. As a matter of fact, my stomach turns as I write this. I eventually walked up to the front door, and a small man came to the door and had this amazing smile, which made me feel more at ease immediately. And he turned out to be Jennifer Pan's uncle, who was living in the home. After being caught up in this story for so long and then seeing where it happened finally at the very end was an emotional experience.
At trial, Jennifer Pan and her co-accused all pleaded not guilty. Pan, Daniel Wong, Lenford Crawford, and David Milvaganam were convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. However, in May 2023, the Ontario Court of Appeal overturned their first-degree murder convictions and ordered retrials. The Crown has since asked the Supreme Court to make its own ruling on the decision. Eric Carty, the fourth accomplice, wound up cooperating with the Crown and was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. He was given 18 years, but died in jail in 2018. For Sherry Aikenhead, it was the story of another family, also raising a daughter, that compelled her to write her first true crime book. We now head east to a small town in Nova Scotia, where a young girl, Carissa, was coming of age.
As dark descends, an uneasy feeling creeps over the 12-year-old girl. The driver of the car she's riding in passes the road where she lives and continues along King Street, which follows the LaHave River through Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. Carissa Boudreau asks where they are going. Was she wise to accept the invitation to go for a drive on this cold January night? It was January 28th, 2008. I'm at home with my 3 sons, watching the news, and I see that there's a mother crying to the public to help find her missing daughter.
We all love you. We all love Carissa. We love you. Our grandparents are looking for you. All of us are. We just want you home safe. Please.
I was working at the Department of Justice at the time as a communications director, so any kind of police story would always interest me. But mostly as a mom, I just prayed that Carissa would be found.
She is 5 feet in height, 130 pounds, straight shoulder-length brown hair, and she was last seen wearing a black...
Carissa, who was 12, had disappeared in the middle of a snowstorm with only her vest and Crocs on her feet.
Carissa was last seen in the mall parking lot in front of Sobeys. She was involved in an argument with her mother, and Mom went inside and to make a few purchases. When she came out after 10-15 minutes, Carissa was gone.
That argument, do you want to put that in perspective?
I just wanted to try to reach out to her as a mom and set some things straight as far as typical teenage things or whatever, and she didn't like what I had to say. I mean, most kids don't, and She didn't want to go in the store with me, which was fine.
The community was distraught, and they rallied. After 13 days of searching, it was now mid-February, and a boy discovered a body on the bank of the Lahave River. Dr. Matt Bowes, the chief medical examiner, confirmed it was Carissa. At the time, I was working and received a call from Dr. Bowes that we may get media calls because information was going to be released. And it, you know, Sherry, it's horrible. They were going to release the cause of death, which was asphyxiation. And also, there was something about the way the body had been placed. Her jeans had been pulled down to her ankles to make it look like a sexual assault. So by doing the autopsy, he was also able to confirm that it was not a sexual assault. So that added another, I guess, element to the story of why someone would purposely do that and try to throw the police off. It was very calculating, and my heart broke. Just let me out, Carissa tells the driver. The car hits a bump where the pavement ends and the street merges into a dirt and gravel road. Minutes later, the driver pulls over at the bottom of a hill. You want to get out? Get out. I did want to capture Carissa's point of view. I wouldn't start writing the book until 15 years later, but I was always curious. How did they actually solve this crime and bring justice? And when they arrested Carissa's mother and boyfriend, Penny's boyfriend, Vernon, suddenly everybody suspected there was more to the story. Their behavior of Vernon and Penny was noticed by neighbors. Fight between Vernon and Penny. How could you do this? How could you get us involved in this? Really damning statements, but they had no proof whatsoever, and they had to release them the next morning after 24 hours without charging them. And suddenly, news about the story became very quiet. What the public didn't know at the time is that the RCMP decided to launch a Mr. Big Sting operation. They bring in operators undercover to try to befriend and lure first Vernon, because they saw him as the easy target, into a fake organized crime ring. So probably the toughest challenge of writing the book was that I was determined to find one of the undercover operators. I got that call literally the night before the first draft of my book was going in. He had heard that I'd been looking for him. I was almost in shock. He said, "Hi, it's Steve. I heard you were looking for me." And with that, I thought, oh my goodness, this is the guy who helped crack the case. He shared how attached he had become to Vernon. He told the investigators he didn't think Vernon had anything to do with the direct killing of Carissa, and it was time to set their sights on Penny, the mom. And he actually told me he remembered the conversation that, "You got to do this for me, Vern. You know, we need a woman, and I'm counting on you." For me, it completely changed the book, and I felt more confident as a writer that I now knew exactly what happened. I wasn't relying on court documents solely. There is one excerpt from my book that I don't read, and that's the confession. The actual confession from Penny.
No video or audio recording of Penny's Mr. Big confession has ever been released. Neither has the transcript. But we do have the agreed upon statement of facts. In it, the graphic details of what Penny did to her daughter, a summary of what Penny disclosed to an undercover operator during the sting operation.
So for him to describe that to me and tell me When he heard it for the first time, he vomited.
After buying juice and bacon at Sobeys, Penny described returning to the car where Carissa was waiting for her. Out of the trunk, Penny grabbed a piece of beige twine and put it in her pocket. After driving Carissa around, once it was dark, she drove to a secluded spot.
Carissa opens the passenger door. Should she run? The driver senses her hesitation and within seconds comes around to the side of the car. With a single shove, the driver becomes Carissa's assailant. Confused, Carissa's eyes widen with fear. Her pulse races as the attacker pushes her to the frozen ground.
Penny said she pushed, tackled Carissa, and Carissa fell on her back. The only thing Carissa said to her was, "Mommy, don't."
So for me, that's the hardest part of the book. It was the hardest to write. Carissa can't breathe. She digs her fingers into the icy dirt as she tries to wiggle free. Heaving for air, her sight blurring, Carissa's eyes bulge as she shouts at her attacker. No one hears the child's muffled cries as she blacks out.
Penny said she was face to face with her daughter, which makes what she did next all the more horrific. Penny used her knees to pin Carissa down, then she strangled her with the twine.
At her first court appearance, Penny Boudreau was met with outrage.
But I did want to know more about this person. How could she do that? And who was this child?
Penny, have you got anything to say?
Are you sorry, Penny?
Penny's parole reports and also her confession to Mr. Big show that she felt desperate at the time. She had always wanted a lasting relationship with someone. She had just come through a divorce. And so she felt very threatened by something that Vernon had said. That either you sort this out with Carissa or we're not can't go on. There's too much fighting. She interpreted this to mean that she had to do something about Carissa. And the saddest part is she had so many options to send Carissa back to her dad, to send her to other relatives.
The judge said herself, crocodile tears, and that's all it's ever been, and that's all it ever will be.
And I had hoped to talk to her father. I thought it was important that they knew I was writing a book. Sometimes horrible crimes, we just want to forget them, and I respect that. I respect the people that can't talk about it. But I wanted it to be on the record, and I wanted people to know more about this girl. I tracked down 3 of her former classmates, and they were quite courageous to want to talk to me. And I learned that she was quite a spunky, fun little girl who stood up for her friends, who liked to dance and sing. When it comes to writing true crime, some people's reactions are, why would you do that? In fact, some of my own friends ask me. True crime allows people to see the impact rather than fiction. But I must say that knocking on doors in your 50s is a lot harder than when I was in my 20s. Knock, knock, knock. I knew showing up at the house where Penny's father and stepmother lived would reopen a deep wound. I wanted to hear about their memories of Carissa firsthand. They were victims too. Just the mention of Carissa's name evoked a flood of tears from Marcia Daw. Her moan shuddered through me. She didn't yell or slam the door. Marcia grabbed my hand, pulled me inside the tiny little home where Carissa had spent part of her childhood. I found the courage to ask my first question. She would not even say Penny's name. And so by talking to this family, I definitely got a sense of how much joy Carissa had brought her grandmother. She still had photos of Carissa in her living room.
In handing down her sentence, the judge admonished Penny Boudreau for crying crocodile tears during her public pleas, all the while knowing Carissa was dead. The judge then sentenced Boudreau to life with no eligibility for parole until after 20 years is served.
So one of the biggest controversial parts of this case is that the Crown decided to agree to second-degree murder, not first. But in the days that followed her guilty plea, Vernon went public with his denial and dismay that Penny would suggest that he had given her an ultimatum, and that in no way, when he asked Penny to sort things out with Carissa, did he ever infer that she kill her. I definitely did not try to sensationalize this story, and I had a lot of feedback from my readers that I was successful in doing that. This story isn't over, and there is a final chapter. I wrote to Penny several times in jail, and I never heard from her. And when Penny is released on parole, perhaps we'll hear that final chapter from her.
I know the book, sometimes ends up on the shelves in the true crime section. I've never really thought of this as a true crime book or a true crime investigation. Like, in some ways, maybe it's more like a false crime. My name is John Chipman. I'm a journalist and author of A Death in the Family. Keith had found what he was looking for, his adoption papers. His mother's name was Tammy Marquardt, but as he read on, another name kept popping up, Kenneth. Then he saw something that dropped him down into his father's chair. Keith kept repeating that his mother was a murderer. Yeah, Tammy Marquardt, young mother, living in poverty in an unstable relationship, and she has one child at this point, Kenneth, and tragedy happens. Tammy's just at home looking after her son, and he takes a nap. Kenneth wakes up and he kind of calls out to her, and it sounds like he's in distress, and by the time she gets out, she finds him in the spare bed in the bedroom, kind of tangled up in the sheets. And it seems like the more effort she does in trying to untangle him, it only gets him more and more tangled. And she eventually calls 911, and by this time she's having a panic attack because her son looks like he's kind of non-responsive now, and gets instructions from the 911 operator on how to do CPR, and she's frozen and she can't do it. And then they take him to the hospital, but because of the amount of time that he was kind of unconscious, it seems like there was brain damage, and eventually they take him off life support, and he died 3 days later. I think people just have a hard time with their story, right? How hard can it be to free a child from a bunch of blankets?
During Marquardt's original trial, Dr. Charles Smith testified that red marks found on her son's lungs and chest were proof that he suffocated.
Dr. Charles Smith was basically a preeminent Ontario's top pediatric forensic pathologist. So when looking at the autopsy of Kenneth, he found evidence that he felt pointed towards Tammy either smothering her son or asphyxiating her son. Under normal circumstances or under other circumstances, Dr. Smith is the type of person that, like, we and society in general kind of lionizes, right? He saw himself as the last line of defense for defenseless children.
Marquardt was convicted October 1995 of the second-degree murder of her son Kenneth Wynne. Her case hinged on the testimony of Smith.
Since that time, 6 separate forensics experts have disagreed, saying that the boy may have died due to a seizure or other natural causes.
He had been in that position since 1992, and it wasn't until 2001 or so where there was serious kind of red flags raised about his work in a number of cases that all kind of broke publicly around the same time, where the chief coroner's office was kind of, forced to take this more serious look at it.
She spent 14 years in jail accused of killing her 2-year-old son. Tammy Marquardt is another victim of disgraced pathologist Charles Smith. She learned today she'll be granted a new trial, a chance to finally clear her name.
When I first reached out to Tammy, I think for Tammy, she wanted, it's validation, to have your story told and to have your experiences heard. Kenneth was a toddler, about 2.5 years old, and he did have a history of health problems. He had had pneumonia, he had asthma, he also had epilepsy and had a number of epileptic seizures in the past. For so long, she was trying to tell people her story and no one listened.
Finally. Nothing should have happened in the first place.
You are free to go, ma'am. With those words, the judge ended Tammy Markart's 17-year nightmare, 14 of them in prison.
One of the challenges in tackling this book and the subject matter is there's so many cases, right? We're talking about 20 cases.
There's Louise Reynolds. She spent 2 years in prison after Smith said she stabbed her 7-year-old 80 times. The little girl actually died from dog bites. Marco Trotta. 10 years ago, he and his wife were convicted of killing their baby.
Just wanting to go home.
It just really struck home for me about how the ripple effect of these type of miscarriages of justice, it really spreads far. And that's what I was really interested in exploring, is who were all the people who were affected by the mistakes that Dr. Charles Smith and the system that supported him and the others that worked in it created through this type of work. There's thousands of documents. I did dozens of interviews. There wasn't a book of record. And so that's, I think there's real value in not letting that episode kind of get lost to history. They told me, that's why they talked to me, so they wouldn't be forgotten, so their experiences wouldn't be forgotten, and so their children wouldn't be forgotten.
For as many as 20 Ontario families, his expertise on how their children died is now considered completely and utterly wrong. At an inquiry called to determine how he saw murder where murder didn't exist, how he blamed the wrong people, Smith finally said he was sorry. Not in person, through his lawyer.
Dr. Smith sincerely regrets these mistakes and apologizes to all who may have been affected by his errors.
The book took 4 years to write, and I tried over and over and over again during that 4-year period to reach him. I just got no's from his legal representation and never heard back from him directly, and so I wasn't able to ask, all these questions that people still have, myself included.
Smith called them honest mistakes, adding he never intended to cause anyone harm.
I really hope that it can change from this. I hope the justice system has learned something, and I hope that things can improve.
Yes, the system got better and is better. After the public inquiry, it was led by retired Justice Stephen Gouge. He made 169 recommendations, and I think largely all of them were pretty quickly implemented. And then, of course, a question that often gets asked is was Dr. Smith ever charged? Did he ever go to jail, right, for the mistakes that he made and the impact that he had on people's lives? And yeah, the accountability never got close to that. He was not charged. He never went to prison.
He's lost his title of doctor, and he's lost his ability to work in the medical field, and that's about the best we're ever going to get out of it.
I don't know, does that equal accountability?
The Supreme Court is now considering Marquette's appeal. She's hoping her other 2 sons, given up for adoption before going to jail, will want to seek her out and hear her story.
When Kenneth died, Tammy was a single mother, but by the time she was basically incarcerated, sent to prison for his murder, she had 2 more children, Keith and Eric.
Markart's 2 other sons, now 12 and 14, were put up for adoption. They have no idea who she is, and she has no idea where they are. In time, she hopes that will change.
And so I was able to speak with Keith and his adoptive father through this process as well.
One day I know that my boys are going to want to find me, so they'll hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
He double-checked her address, then braced himself against the bitter winter wind. It felt surreal, walking unfamiliar streets to an unfamiliar house to meet his mother for the first time. Keith Hutton knocked on the door. The tiny woman who answered introduced herself as Tammy, and Keith introduced himself as her son.
Since her acquittal, Tammy Wynne Markart has been trying to make up for lost time. Tammy told us, "Meeting my son was one of the best days of my life. But it also hurt because he told me he felt he'd been kidnapped his whole life because of what happened to me." We also spoke with Keith about reuniting with his birth mother. He said, "It meant a lot to me to get answers. Growing up, I was always asking these what ifs. It gave me closure." Welcome back to Crime Beat. The first step in writing a true crime novel is often reaching out to the survivors, to those involved. But how do you bring a victim's story to life when the crime took place over 100 years ago? We return now to the conclusion of Murder, They Wrote.
I'm always looking for entry points into Canadian history because so few of us know any. And I had noticed that actually what readers really love are crime books. Bert Massey turned off the sidewalk towards his front door. He had no idea what awaited him. On the evening of February the 8th, 1915, Bert Massey has finished work and he's walking down Walmer Road. He's walking home. Behind the front door stood the Massey family's English domestic servant, Carrie Davies. Carrie was a mere slip of a girl, a mousy 18-year-old who rarely spoke, unless spoken to. But tonight, this particular young woman carried a gun. So Carrie has taken the gun, which actually belongs to Bert Massey, and is hiding behind the door. When she heard Bert Massey mount the steps to the veranda, she raised her right arm. At first, Bert did not see her in the shadows. Then Carrie pulled the door open and stepped forward. A shot rang out. A sharp pain erupted in Bert's left side. He gaped at the young woman before backing quickly down the steps.
He didn't see the maid skulking in the shadows of the porch. When she stepped forward and aimed her gun, it was the last thing that Bert Massey saw.
My name is Charlotte Gray, and I'm the author of The Massey Murder, A Maid, Her Master, and the Trial That Shocked a Country. Carrie Davies was a 18-year-old immigrant from Britain. She was a maid of all work. She earned very little. When the police arrive, they go upstairs and find Carrie, who in fact actually meets them on the landing of the second floor. Say hello and I'm the person you want. And she's taken to the police station to be interrogated. And when they say, what's happened? Why did you do it? The crucial sentence she says is, he tried to ruin me. And she didn't say much more at that stage. The trial was a huge show. Crowds lined up. It's 1915, so it's pre-television, it's pre-movies. The law courts themselves were well known as a place where you could be quite entertained by what was going on.
The year is 1915. A steady stream of Canadian men leaves Toronto every week to reinforce the depleted Allied ranks in the Flanders battlefront.
It happened against the backcloth of what was going on in Europe in the war, which was at that stage not going well for the Allies. And Carrie's trial was both a distraction from this, but also an encapsulation of it. Was it after you had seen Mr. Massey outside that you only thought of going to get the revolver? The lawyer pressed Carrie. Yes. Had you thought of getting it before that? No. When Carrie takes to the witness box, she describes in more graphic detail why she felt that Bert was trying to ruin her.
Few people realize at the time that the First World War will bring with it a social upheaval back here in Canada.
Although they had one of the most famous names in Canada at that period, Bert Massey came from a branch of the family that had been essentially ostracized and certainly cut out of the will of Hart Massey, the great industrialist. He was 34 and he was a salesman. He was a flashy kind of guy, had a sense of entitlement. Also, he was not entirely happily married.
He was a man with a penchant for seducing his servant girls behind his wife's back. Most of them complied with his advances to keep their job, but one did not. Her name was Carrie Davies.
She describes how there'd been a dinner party where everybody had drunk a lot, and afterwards he kissed her twice and said, "I like little girls." And from there, the following day, she goes up to his bedroom when she thinks he's in the bath to make his bed. But he's not in the bath. He's wandering around in his bathrobe. and he goes to his wife's underwear drawer and pulls out some underwear and says, why doesn't she try it on? And then he assaults her. She's terrified. She's frightened, that he is going to rape her. I was pulling the trigger all the time, but the revolver did not seem to work. I thought of him doing me harm, and that was the only thought I had in my head. I thought he was just lying there to escape the bullets. To me, one of the most shocking moments was the fact that her lawyer commissioned 2 doctors to go to Don Valley Jail and examine her to establish that she was a virgin. It would actually turn out to be a crucial bit of evidence that she was a virtuous woman, and Bert's attack on her virtue was therefore beyond wicked. But just imagining that scene with her lying probably on a bare mattress, and she must have just felt, even more powerless. Finding her voice was a huge challenge. One of the few instances where I could actually hear Carrie's voice was when she was in the courtroom. I did not know what I had done until I got to the police station, and until I heard some man say on the phone, "The man is dead, all right." At the end of the trial, both lawyers made very compelling arguments. Carrie's lawyer argued that she was impossibly vulnerable and that she had no other recourse in terms of defending herself. The Crown prosecutor argues that the law has to be stuck to, and you can't have a system where if a jury feels sympathy for the aggressor, they decide against a murder charge. It only takes the jury, in fact, 30 minutes, and they come back in, and the chairman says, not guilty, and the court erupts with support for Carrie. It was a surprise because it was out of whack with the way that women were treated generally. I mean, remember, they hadn't even got a vote at that point. But what was essentially driving the verdict that she was not guilty was a sense of chivalry. It took another 75 years before the abuse of women was recognized as a crime. True crime is a wonderful, wonderful vehicle for giving people a sense of not just sort of what dates things happened, but also what was it like to actually be there. It has to be said that the whole case was quietly buried within sort of Massey family mythology. At the same time, I also wanted to trace Carrie's family. After the book came out, I was doing a reading in a public library near Toronto, and there was a woman at the very end of the line to get books signed and said to me, "I'm Carrie's great-granddaughter." And she'd read the book, so she felt reassured that I'd treated it the crime pretty dispassionately. And I had wonderful conversations with her, and she described Carrie's later life to me. And she'd never told her children about this event in her lifetime. She'd lied about her age. She said she was about 3 years younger than she was so that she could just bury it. She felt her whole life that she had to atone for this. Much true crime writing is pretty salacious, particularly because the writer has decided from the start what the story is and who is the guilty man or woman. As a historian, I knew the importance of relying on documentary evidence. And I also knew the importance of, as a writer, of allowing the reader to make up their mind about what degree of culpability should be attached to Carrie. How guilty was she? And what exactly was going on in her mind?
4 authors, 4 cases, and many years of writing and researching. So would they do it again? Is the true crime genre for them?
I would write another true crime book, but again, I felt personally attached to this story. So it would have to be a story that I guess I felt as invested in.
Actually, this book has been one of my 3 or 4 most successful. I was quite surprised.
When I decided to write the book, it really came out of left field. I did crime as a career, and I largely avoided crime.
I've never really thought of myself as a true crime author. Yeah, for sure it took a toll, yeah. I'm lucky that I have a wife.
I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast, now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.